UK Youth Council set up under the banner of Faith for Earth. I'm Sabah Yassin. I'm an international relations and politics graduate, currently working at a UK-based NGO called Islamic Help. I run the climate change and campaigning advocacy department there. So we work on educational empowerment of climate action, climate-related projects such as our pioneering children's eco-village, Trees for Change, and beekeeping projects. We also work on sustainable livelihood projects there, while also working on looking for new ways to bring more attention to the climate injustices which vulnerable people face on a daily basis. Now, until recently, climate change and other environmental issues such as levels of pollution, overconsumption of natural resources, as well as many more, have always been referred to in terms of the future. However, for many people, the future is already here. As the impacts worsen and intensify over time, it's the children and the youth of today who face the worst effects, among other vulnerable groups. Now more than ever, young people's voices are calling out to challenge as they see their futures of poverty, violence, and a world that our grandparents would not recognise. Young people are fearing becoming strangers to the beauty and the bounty of the world experienced by generations before them. However, as you'll see today, far from being passive victims, young people are powerfully speaking up on a global scale, some of which you're going to hear about today. Now, whether it's through education, technology, science, or law, the youth are stepping up and using their own individual skills to fight for climate action and other environmental issues. Faith and the environment are two factors which are inherently intertwined, and together they've both got the potential to bring forward positive environmental change. Now, it's proven and well known that if we tap into the religious and spiritual wealth of people and their beliefs, this accelerates people's engagement and their drive to contribute. Now, the UK is a multi-faith and multicultural country with a number of groups who work towards climate action. There are network groups such as Faith for the Climate with a range of people from different backgrounds, while there's also strong faith groups such as EcoSeek, Boomi Global and the Bahu Trust. Now, there's also youth groups with a strong presence in the UK who fight for climate action, such as the Youth Climate Strike and Extinction Rebellion Youth. However, there does not appear to be any particular group that brings together both of these groups, so young faith leaders from a range of different beliefs. The influence that young people have is huge. And if we bring together a group of those young people, each one influenced and motivated in a particular way by their own religious values, this would have an immense impact on the campaigning and advocacy for climate change. By mobilising young people from different faiths, a youth council as part of the Faith for Earth coalition is going to positively engage young people with their efforts to tackle global challenges that we face. Now, first, we're going to hear from Rachel Manders about her amazing work on mobilising churches and individuals across the UK to walk and pray for climate justice.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to start by just sharing my screen, so hopefully I can get that up now. And I'm going to tell you about some of the work that I was involved in last year in the run-up to COP26. So I'm part of the Young Christian Climate Network, and I was one of the co-lead organisers for our project Relay to COP26, which was a journey that started in June of last year and took us from Cornwall all the way up to Glasgow, where we arrived just ahead of the start of the conference. Young Christian Climate Network is an informal network of young people in the UK. We're all aged 18 to 30. We launched only in August 2020, so all in lockdown, and we've very much mostly met virtually. So this photo is actually taken in December after the end of this project, and it was the first time we'd met all together as a group. You can follow us on social media with that handle. And we aim basically to take action collectively, so things that we can't do alone, but that are only possible when we're working together. And we, together at the beginning of last year, so in January 2021, we knew that the UK was hosting COP. We thought it was really important, but we were wondering about how we could get UK churches to engage with it. And we kind of looked back at other things that have happened with Christian activists. So one of those being the Jubilee 2000 campaign, which led to debt cancellation at the start of the millennium, and the other being a pilgrimage that a group of Christians walked from between London and Paris ahead of the COP in 2015. And we thought, maybe there's a way to combine both of these things. So we started planning what we were calling a relay. So it wasn't just one group walking the whole way, but over time we would cover the distance from Cornwall, where the G7 was happening, all the way to COP. And along the way we wanted to talk to churches both about what COP was, why it was important, but also about the connection between climate change and debt, because we felt like a lot of churches engaged with a concern for the earth more generally, but didn't necessarily realise that countries are being pushed into debt because when the impacts of climate change happen, there's no financing for loss and damage. So that was our idea, and we came up with this very long route, which started in St. Ives and weaved through all the different places that are on this list. And we stopped in 10 different cities, and in the cities we were stopping at, we organised like a programme of events with people locally. So you can see on this screen we have photos of some of those events. So in Exeter Cathedral, meeting the mayor in Bristol, arriving at St. Paul's Cathedral in London last August, and then making our way up the country through Manchester. Then there's a panel event in York that's pictured there, and reaching the Angel of the North in Newcastle, which was when we started to feel like maybe we would make it after all. One of the things that we did while we were walking was to take a boat with us. We named our boat the Pilgrim because it was a pilgrimage. And the reason we had a boat was to symbolise this idea that in the pandemic, people have been familiar with the phrase same storm, different boats. And we wanted to say, oh, actually, it's the same with climate change. Like if you are more disadvantaged or vulnerable, you're likely to be far more impacted by climate change. So we took this boat with us. It had materials from church communities around the world who are most affected by the impacts of climate change. And it became the symbol that we used. And at the same time as we were walking, we were asking churches, whether they were on the route or not, to make their own origami paper boats, to talk about this idea in church, to pray, and then to send these boats onto their MP and say, COP26 is coming, please can you take action? We're particularly concerned about climate finance and the provision that's needed for things like loss and damage at this COP. And so this meant that actually we went through all our 10 cities across 20 weeks of walking. We did a number of different radio interviews, TV, different articles, over 150 events, over 200 MPs we were spoken to, and we also people. So we were all 18 to 30 organising it, but we very much welcomed anybody getting involved however they wanted to. And churches made 28,000 origami paper boats to also join in with our campaign. And this photo is us arriving in Glasgow with some of the other pilgrimages right at the very end. And it was an immense moment of achievement for us to know that we could make it, having done all of the different planning and things that went into it. And I'm just going to finish by talking through some of the lessons that we when you're starting out and taking action. We were starting planning in the context of a national lockdown in the UK. We had no idea whether we'd be able to do some of the fundraising that we needed to cover our costs, so things like our public liability insurance. We didn't know whether we'd get enough volunteers, but we just felt convicted that we had to act and that we would do our best to do it. And actually that helped us approach everything with a really positive, problem-solving mindset of, we don't know how we're going to achieve this yet, but we are going to do it together. And it was really exciting to see different people bring in their different skills, whether that was kind of planning the route and doing some of the maps and talking to the councils and police forces in the areas that we'd be walking through, or whether it was coordinating local volunteers and working out the refreshments and the risk assessments that we needed to do, all of that. One of the other things we learned was just how many different skills people have, and we left our planning quite open to invite suggestions from people about what they wanted to do. So we ended up with quite a few tributary routes, so where we weren't walking, but people in that area wanted to join in, so they made their own route to connect to ours. And that was something that we really valued, was seeing the different contributions that people were able to make to this overall project that we had. We also realised that actually part of the power of what we did was that there was a story to tell about a group of people walking, covering all this distance because they really cared about climate change. And that really opened up people to the idea of joining in and wanting to be part of something that was bigger to them. So it's something that we will take into future campaigns and actions that we do, alongside the idea of just how important it is to have fun. That was something consistently fed back from everybody involved, was just how lovely it was to meet different people of all ages that they hadn't known before this, getting involved and having really good conversations and connecting with others. So that's just a really quick overview of what we were doing last year, and there will be more to come, but it's just one of the many ways that young people have been taking action in the UK on climate. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Rachel. The work you're doing seems to be honestly amazing. And just sort of picking up on what you said about the power of what you were doing, I think that's really shown how you've managed to mobilize people within your group, you know, just by saying, firstly, the 28,000 origami boats, that's amazing. And also, you know, people making their own routes to join yours. I think you've done really amazing. So thank you very much for that. Next, we've got Sonar Pasha, a climate activist, part of the Youth Strike for Climate. And with her, we've got Lucy Plummer, who's a steering committee member for Religions for Peace UK Youth Network. Now, Sonar will be performing some spoken word and then discussing both feelings of frustration and hope for the youth with Lucy.
Climate change threatens global food security. The UN calls for a change to human diet, increasing irrelevance of climate change denial. Climate change could cause toxic mercury to accumulate, heat will kill, glacier funeral, the terrible truth, another heat wave hits, unparalleled effects, evidence is abundant, global warming is indisputable, many species will not survive. It's not the first time I've heard this, and it won't be the last, and that's why I'm begging you to stop with your procrastination plans and instead act fast. Our future is determined by what we do or don't do in the present, as that becomes our past. The facts, the figures, the problems, the solutions are there, and that's why I'm aghast that you still aren't doing enough. Our voices by your lies are overcast. Brainwashing children with these far-fetched ideologies, it's not as bad as they say. It's been like this since the beginning of time. It's a hoax made up by China, waste of money. We should not indoctrinate our children with fear-mongering. I am terrified, with good reason, backed by science, not your lies. Don't lie and say it's not that bad, because people have died, animals have died, everything is going to get fried, and that's including your multi-million-pound holiday home in the countryside. What you are doing is completely unjustified. We want to save all of our lives. We are not satisfied with your lack of action, i.e. homicide. Are you qualified to make these decisions because you are committing suicide for the petrified who need to stand side by side and refuse to divide until something has been modified? You'll lose out on some cash as you invest in saving worldwide. If for nothing else, do this for mankind. And it's not the first time that others have died, so you can satisfy your greed. We know about the genocides. We are horrified with a crisis that is still denied, but not this time. This time, we promise. We will give you the hope that we owe you. We are listening to what you have to say to the people. We take this very seriously. We will act on what we are telling you. Support us. We have heard it all before, and we were in awe because what we saw was the same old story. Us you ignore, no matter how much we implore. Everything we ask for and the change we call for, you have nothing to account for, so we will no longer fall for your pathetic promises of less plastic straws. We will demand that you change laws as we desperately cling to the hope that we aren't done for.
Hi, Sana. Thank you so much for sharing your heart in that incredible poem. I have a question for you. What strikes me is your anger, frustration, and disappointment, particularly with people in positions of power over their response or lack of response to the climate crisis, which I know a lot of young people also feel the same way that you do. However, in the final line of the poem, you say, cling on to hope, which kind of gave me a glimmer of maybe something else that you feel. So can you tell me more about, simultaneously feeling hopeful while still feeling extremely frustrated? And is there a right way to feel when faced with the climate crisis?
Yes, thank you for your question. So this spoken word poem, it deals with two emotions which dominate the climate conversation, and that's both hope and frustration. Why I wrote this poem and expressed my frustration in this extremely vocal, unashamedly angsty way is because within the climate movement, I noticed two ways that young people are perceived. They are those who view them as overly critical, bored children looking to criticise authority for the sake of criticising authority, children who don't understand how the world works, who are overstepping their place in society by being so vocal, who care about climate for the sake of being woke, who have unfounded frustration. And then the other view I've seen is the other extreme. It's this view where children are praised as these wonderful angelic figures of hope, a sign of how promising and politically aware and environmentally friendly this new generation is. Now, this perception might appear to be a good perception, but it has a tendency to greenwash young people as these figures who are hopeful for change while not actually enacting the change they are requesting. And so for me, this poem is about bridging the gap between these two extremes and presenting climate activists, particularly young climate activists, as having the capacity for both hope and frustration, and why I think both of these emotions are integral to solving the climate crisis. We can't solve the climate crisis without being critical of those who have failed us, those who haven't done enough, those who need to do more. And frustration is a normal human reaction to show that you care. It's a sign that you care, and it's a perfectly valid emotion. And by being frustrated with the actions or inaction of others, it can lead you to enact change yourself. That said, hope is still fundamental because if we are hopeless about our future, we will be resigned to a miserable fate. And so hope can inspire us to channel our frustration into productivity. And that's exactly what we need. We need to be productive. We need to actually do things that enact change and that help solve the climate crisis, whether that be on a personal level, a local level, national or international. So both hope and frustration drive me in my climate activism, and I think they're both valid. And more importantly, I think they are both necessary to achieve progress. And on that note of hope, I have a question for you, because you have mentioned in previous conversations that for you, young people represent hope. Why do you feel that young people are a symbol of hope in the environmental and climate crises?
Thank you for your question, Sana. And I really appreciate your insights on kind of the paradox that of young people in this space. So really, really interesting to hear your thoughts. In terms of kind of why I think that young people are a symbol of hope, but there are many, many reasons. But the biggest reason for me is highlighted by you already, is that young people take action. Young people, I believe, are active agents of change, both in their local communities and countries. And this was something that really stood out for me at COP26, which was the first time I had been in a space like that. And during a panel discussion on the topic of youth climate leadership, which I organized as part of the Soccer Gakkai International series of events, Sowing Seeds of Hope, Action for Climate Justice, I heard so many fantastic examples of youth climate leadership, which demonstrated this power of young people to me. And I'd just really love to share a few of those with you, if that's all right. So we heard from, in the panel, Elojulo from Nigeria, who shared that many young people have turned their frustration into action by switching from participating in political agendas to taking local action on the ground, which he describes as youth taking matters into their own hands. He gave the following examples of local action: tree planting initiatives, plastic recycling campaigns, and plogging, which is a combination of jogging and picking up plastic waste for recycling. Another unforgettable example was shared by Shreya from Nepal, who described how she and her friends led an online consultation with over 1,000 youth during the COVID-19 pandemic from their own initiative, using their own resources, in order to make sure that the voices and ideas of young people were included in Nepal's nationally determined contributions. And just one more amazing example that I really want to share is from Kaluki from Kenya, who talked about how he visits communities and invites them for dialogues to help them understand local issues and to help him to understand local issues. He then researches policies to consider how his voice and the voices of communities can count in recommendations, and takes every opportunity to voice out these key concerns so that they are known on a wider scale. And for me, it's really stories and examples like this that I believe make young people a symbol of hope in the face of our planetary crisis. And it's so important that we hear these stories because they do give people hope. As one audience member to the youth panel commented, that the insight and passion of these young people went far deeper than any she saw in the Blue Zone. So young people are creating change, and they are challenging the injustices of this world that have contributed to the climate and environmental crisis. And with young people leading the way, I am hopeful that we can transform our current situation and achieve our vision of a healthy and happy planet for everyone. And I know that you have so many examples of kind of how you've taken action. So I wonder if you can share some of these with us, how you've managed to take your frustration and use it in a productive manner to instill change.
Yes, absolutely, I will. And can I just say that those examples that you gave just really reminded me of how it's young people as individuals taking action that we manage to form this collective as a global community, and that's so we can really make change. So for me personally, one of my first active engagement with the climate movement was the first ever global youth climate strike. Hearing about the strike and looking and researching into why I should participate and care about climate justice led to a greater understanding of the magnitude of the crisis we were in and how little we had done to solve it was shocking for me. And it made me feel both overwhelmed and then frustrated. Frustrated because I was just a person, a teenager, with much less power than these people in really high positions who could really make a difference, but weren't as far as I could see. And I felt extremely frustrated, not only with the climate crisis, but also with my lack of abilities, or so I thought, to do anything meaningful. And then, when I went on my first ever climate strike, March 2019, it was the first ever global youth climate strike that was, and it was amazing. It was phenomenal. It was so many young people all uniting for this one cause. And in that moment, you do just think, if we could pull this off, what else can we do? You feel hopeful. You start to feel so hopeful about the changes you can make, about your abilities, about your power. And on the day after the strike, I remember there were headlines everywhere about all these young people globally who were so frustrated and were demanding change, and MPs were supporting them, and politicians were making promises to them, and climate policy was being questioned. And we, as a global community, in those few hours that we went out on strike, had inspired global conversation and hopefully international change. And the reason I mention this is because, on reflection, I think this initial experience fundamentally shaped and still shapes my climate journey. It made me understand that a lot of the frustration that I felt comes not only with climate change and our response to it, but also my own personal perceived lack of power to instill the change that I want. And that made me understand that I'm not completely powerless or resigned to a life of frustration because of my perceived place in society. It instead made me realise that I must have hope that I can change something. The most productive response to frustration is hope, not empty hope, but hope which you use to motivate yourself and trust in yourself that your efforts will come to fruition. It was frustration that led me to the strike, and the response to the strike gave me hope that I did have some power. Young people had power, they could have their voices heard. And this has been what has carried me forward. I have worked with many organisations, such as the Climate Action Network West Midlands, within the Quaker community, the Muslim community, and most recently I'm a member of the UK School Sustainability Network. And in each one, I'm taking my frustration and using it as a reason to be hopeful. And even if I can open one person's eyes to the climate crisis in my community engagement work, I'm making some degree of positive change. I actually ended up joining Birmingham Youth Strike for Climate and successfully campaigned with them to get Birmingham City Council to declare a climate emergency something which, in the House of Commons, Birmingham Youth Strike for Climate was publicly thanked for their contribution to making this declaration possible, and we were given seats on the Birmingham City Council Climate Task Force. There were moments in that campaign of frustration, don't get me wrong, but the end result was a good one. Hope, by definition, is a feeling of trust and expectation that something you desire will happen. It is the best way to deal with frustration productively. And during that campaign, we felt frustrated at times, but our hope that our efforts were not in vain was what drove us to keep at it and achieve the outcome that we eventually did. Within my own school, I was frustrated with how difficult it was to implement sustainable measures, even things as small as recycling bins, to create a green culture within my school. But it was hope that this sustainable culture would eventually thrive that led me to think more creatively, organising events, teacher talent shows to raise money for environmental charities, clothes swaps, thus engaging my school community with climate justice. Most recently, I was one of 26 form students from across the UK who was selected to be a youth representative at COP26. Being the Midlands youth representative at COP in itself was an opportunity that I wouldn't have imagined I would have just a few years ago when I embarked on that first strike, frustrated that I didn't have a seat at the table, that I didn't have such an opportunity to make change. And then there I was in Glasgow, interviewing people, speaking on panels, meeting the Secretary of State for Education. This was a reminder to me that being hopeful is a lengthy process. Sometimes you have to hope for years before it comes to fruition, but that doesn't mean you should give up. And COP26 was not the end, not the destination, but simply another step along the way. And at each step you may feel frustrated, but it is hope that causes you to carry on moving forward, hoping, trusting that somewhere along the way you'll manage to do something. Currently, I've been selected by the Department of Education to be on their youth advisory panel, where I advise them on their most recent climate strategy. Thinking about where I was before again, the frustration I felt, to now have this seat at the table, to be able to actively and directly help draft government strategy, to have such direct links to a member of cabinet, is a wonderful opportunity, and one that would not be possible if I didn't take the frustration that I felt and use it to fuel my hope for a better future by engaging in all the various climate work I have done in the past few years. And so I think my journey in climate advocacy is driven by both hope and frustration. It was the renowned social activist Thomas Merton who said, to hope is to risk frustration, make up your mind to risk frustration. To be hopeful is to understand that you will be frustrated at times, which I have felt in the climate movement time and time again. And the best way to deal with frustration is to use your hopefulness to do something productive, to tackle what you're frustrated about, to build resilience, and to constantly do whatever is in your power to take those steps towards a brighter future. So that's a bit of a reflection on my experiences of taking my frustration and using it to be hopeful about the future. And we've talked a lot about frustration and hope, but what I'm interested in is, as a young person of faith, what does hope mean to you?
Thank you, Sana. And just to comment, your experience is incredible. It's really a story of transformation, transforming frustration, transforming doubt in yourself, and doubt that we can actually make a difference. So thank you so much for sharing it. And yeah, I'm gonna go from strength to strength. Just to quickly respond to your question about what hope for me as a young person of faith is. It's about the goodness of human beings, and that's the kind of hope that my faith gives me. So the teachings of my faith tradition, which is Nichiren Buddhism, they move me to want to care and protect the environment, but science does that as well. So I would say that the unique element which my faith brings to my work in climate and youth advocacy is that it gives me conviction and belief in the potential of the human capacity to become wiser and more compassionate and to do the right thing for our planet. I have hope because my faith doesn't lie with economic modeling or data-driven probabilities or forecasts, which we are currently relying on too heavily to solve our planetary problems. Belief in humanity is the unique something that my faith gives me, and that is what provides me with an inexhaustible wellspring of hope. I believe as young people and people of faith, this is what we share, and this is what we must hold on to and what we should focus on. We should never give in to despair. We can feel frustration, but we must never feel hopeless. And I just want to end with a quote from Elizabeth Watuti, who she shared this in front of the world leaders at COP26, and it was the standout moment for me. She said, "I believe in our human capacity to do what is right to address the planetary crisis unfolding around us if we let ourselves feel it in our hearts." So thank you for this wonderful dialogue, and I hope we can continue at some point, but our time is up now.
Thank you so much, both to Lucy and to Sana. That was absolutely amazing, an amazing dialogue from both of you. Just picking up a little bit on what you both said, you know, the parallel between Lucy's idea of hope and, as she mentioned, the transformational journey for Sana. That itself is truly hopeful for, I think, everyone who's listening. So thank you very much. Next, we're going to be hearing from Ted Sonin, who's a young student at Cambridge. He's working very hard to fight climate injustices for marginalised communities, and he's going to talk to us about solutions, not sides, and his work bringing people from different backgrounds together for constructive dialogue.
Hi, my name's Ted. I'm a student at Cambridge studying geography. It's an amazing subject, but right now, following on what they said about hope, it's quite a hard thing as a young person to wake up every day and go into a subject where you're studying the deterioration of our ecosystems around us, and holding on to hope is something quite hard for a lot of young people. And I'm impressed with Sana and how hard she can work and going on all these activist trips without getting the sort of burnout that I've been so common of getting, knowing that our future is contingent. So I just want to speak about the importance of faith and faith empowering hope, and how when you link communities of different faith, it really empowers everyone, and it's better for the climate and for our own mental states. In my personal opinion, I think religious communities are some of the most underexploited tools in the current environmental movement. These are hubs of people ready to be mobilized, most of them receiving weekly sermons, interacting with each other, and planning activist things that we could lend that to helping the climate. In the past, there have been cases of anti-science ideologies across certain sects of religions, but we all know today that there's a greater understanding the ethical demand for climate activism that's demanded from their religious texts. Today's pluralist societies have allowed some of the greatest strides in interfaith and cooperation between different religious communities. I've been lucky enough to speak to people of almost all religions, and something that I know my grandparents would have never been able to do. But what I think is the most important thing about interfaith activism is that it holds a light of spirituality, and it has a necessary place in conservation efforts that have been, since the 1970s, been trying to make strides, but we've been clearly failing in the current crisis that has only gotten bigger. But I want to speak about Solutions Not Sides, an interfaith activist organization based in the UK that aims to bring young Jewish and Muslim communities and individuals together to foster peace talks on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But rather than speaking about who caused it and who the onus lies on, it's more about speaking about solutions and the common interest between both groups. And my involvement on it was an extremely interesting experience, because when you're going into something like that, you have preconceived notions of kind of what the other group and what their kind of views on the socio-ecological issues are in the area, and it's a very complex thing. And it was just empowering to be on an organization where everyone there was orientated to pro solution rather than kind of pro discourse about arguing who's to blame. It was a lot more of a conjoining of everyone. And it allowed me to meet people from my own city that I would have never met before. And one of my friends who I made from there, called Zainab, unfortunately, she couldn't make it here to speak with me, but I have some quotes from her that I'd love to share. So I asked her, what are your views on the importance of interfaith dialogue? And Zainab said, in times where people from religious groups may feel targeted and marginalized, bringing people together from different schools of thoughts and having conversations on contentious topics may allow them to come away learning how much they share in common, rather than being increasingly divisive. I asked, did this change after the course? She said, I learned that even people from disparate faiths and potentially ingrained conflicting biases can come together in conversation without conflict if the focus is orientated to solutions and spirituality. A combination of opinions helps better a situation and makes one realize there is no binary right and wrong in situations, but rather a solution of common interest. In my mind, the significance and importance of solutions not sides extends beyond the Israeli-Palestinian conflict because it represents a new interfaith discourse based on finding solutions to socio-ecological crises and providing young people with hope rather than a bombardment of doom. Be it factual, it's increasingly scary for young people. The importance of interfaith communities and social action became evident to me through my synagogue's social action. Luckily, I've been brought up in West London Synagogue, an extremely prominent social actor in the Westminster community, and being brought up in a community where everyone around you is orientated to social action, it really ingrains in the young people kind of not only a hope but a need to act. And just one quick thing I'd like to speak on of my synagogue's work is the asylum seeker shelter that they put on in conjunction with all the other churches and mosques in Westminster, and it's a kind of rotation thing where each weekend one of them has one, and the main aim is kind of also to help these people, but more to promote within our own communities, kind of normalizing being around these types of people and kind of understanding why they're here and that they're not here out of choice, but a lot of the time because of conflict and kind of ecological degradation that's pushed them away from their land. And since I was young, it has allowed me to speak to young children asylum seekers and developed a personal connection to social activism based on my faith and spirituality that if I wasn't part of my synagogue, I would have never had. But interfaith activism brings a light of spirituality to an increasingly mechanistic and reductionist discourse about climate change and climate action. It provides spiritual motivation and the ability to declutter one's mind in a new era where we have to completely reform the system. Decades ago, the environmental movement thought climate change was a result of an information deficit model, whereby once we provided the facts and knew the situation, societal reform would follow. The past 40 years have shown that this is not the case. It is not the fact that we need to innovate new technologies, but rather it's about agency, ethics, and values. And in increasingly uncertain times for young people, especially of those marginalized due to their faith and minority, it is activism which connects these people to each other for the similar goal of a spiritual, mindful community, which empowers me to carry on in uncertain times. Climate change crosses a divide between the factual scientific evidence which proves its existence, but necessarily it is a qualitative issue where human values are at the root of both revolution and action. Post-pandemic, we need to bring youth back together and bring communities of all faith into cooperation for the sake of both youth and climate. Faith communities need to mobilize and spread the light of spirituality in this seemingly dying world. I'd like to end it on just one of my favorite teachings from Judaism, that of Baal Shem Tov, which teaches when the soul lacks spiritual pleasure, it compensates by pursuing the pleasures of this world and its excess. I think it couldn't be more true that society as a whole lacks the spirituality and kind of the faith that we used to have, and kind of this connection to Mother Earth when we live in societies where we no longer are connected to the ground beneath us, and kind of roads extend, at least where we're from, at least in the UK, roads extend beyond your eyes can see, and kind of we're physically separated from nature. And with the recent passing of the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, I think it's just important for all of us to really bring together different communities and empower people for the sake of their own mental health and the climate.
Thank you, Ted. That was really valuable, everything you said. And I think the whole idea of you working, with marginalized communities and bringing about the ideas that people are facing around climate injustice was really valuable. I think I speak for everyone when I say that. Next up, we have Finn Peru, who will be speaking to us about creating intergenerational dialogues between young and old with our common connector of faith and how to listen and learn from each other. And he's got with him Don De Silva, an ex-director at the United Nations Environment Programme.
Thank you, Saba, and thank you everyone so far. I'm really enjoying the energy that we've got here as a group. So yeah, as Saba said, excuse me, We'll have a quick intergenerational dialogue with Don today, who's worked with UNEP for 25 years. And I came across Don in the Tariki Buddhist Therapist Forum, where he talks about Buddhism, justice, and sustainability. So thank you very much, Don, for joining us today. And I'd like to start off with a question on your experience of UNEP. So after being involved with UNEP since its inception for many years, what lessons might you have learned from working on complex problems such as the climate crisis?
Thank you, Finn. Just to correct, it's not 25 years, it's about 15 years directly. But I reported the first Earth Summit in 1972. I was the age of quite a few present here. But climate change is not as complex as it is made out to be. And you really need to understand also the unprecedented amount of work that UNEP has put in to climate activities. It was way back in 1973 when Maurice Strong, the first executive director, organized the expert group meeting on climate change. And since then, as a result of UNEP's activities, that today sustainability and climate change are household terms. And those initiatives like the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and then later on the COPs that have followed suit, are very much part and parcel of the initiative of UNEP's work. And it takes a great deal of time and effort to bring different countries together, from the Marshall Islands in the Pacific to bigger countries like the United States and so on. But at the same time, climate issues are nothing new, because the Buddha, some 2,500 years ago, talked about the elemental relationships between people and climate. And he put it very bluntly. He said, unprincipled living within rulers impact down the line, and then also with the vagaries of the weather and beyond. But in the West, so far, up until recently, hurricanes, typhoons, storms have been regarded as natural disasters or acts of God, in which humankind did not seem to have any control over. So today we have, as a result of data, clear evidence that the impact of our profligate living has a very clear impact on climate issues, sustainability, COVID, and so on. And we still, but at the same time, we still measure our progress by outmoded GDP statistics. So these, in terms of values and faith, are really concerning unsustainable living is the domain of faith. So faith and values have a critical role to play.
Thank you, Don. So understanding that climate action has been going on for decades, really. What I guess is coming out in some young people, including myself now, is that the disasters, like you said, are more tangible. They're happening more frequently, and we have a deadline on action. We have 2030, basically. So I was wondering if you can understand some of the frustration that some young people face, and how you think faith can help us to sustain our commitment on climate action in the face of adversity.
Yes, I understand the frustration, because I sometimes get frustrated, but every day I take some time to turn that frustration into positive action. Actually, in many ways, we are dealing with three related existential threats. In addition to COVID and climate change, we have forgotten the impact of poverty. And at the root of all these three existential threats is unsustainable living and lifestyles. Unfortunately, poverty doesn't seem to feature in these very beautifully crafted conservation films. Let's take a look at poverty and bring it into the forefront. According to UNICEF, about 1 billion children today lack the basic necessities, such as nutrition and clean water in the world today. And some of those who are joining us now may be from the developing regions of the world where this is being enacted today. And so every day, existence is a huge challenge for many millions of young people in the world today. So that is, in terms of unprincipled, unsustainable living, this is the domain of faith. Now, Buddhism enables me to deal with the environment in the environment, and also to realize that it takes time for things to change. If you look at slavery, it was a long campaign. Releasing Mandela and ending apartheid was a very, very long campaign. Climate action for me has been a roller coaster ride with ups and downs. But for me, as a Buddhist, bhavana, or the scientific cultivation of the mind, has enabled me to stay on course when the times are both joyful and when the times are challenging.
Yeah, this discipline is precisely that. I think that technology, of course, is a solution to this, but especially here in, well, I'm sitting in the UK, and where some people, where it's quite clear that the affluent part of society is causing much of the greenhouse gas emissions with their lifestyles. It is important that we keep that in mind and change those lifestyles. And we just have that comes from within. I can't tell someone else, go and change. It is up to them to have that discipline and change it. And I think what faith, so from my Buddhist faith as well, it's told me that actually through having this discipline and through being self-aware of my own, instincts, what's maybe a desire that I have, what is actually a need, having that distinction is super important, and that actually allows me to be free, because I'm not going to be thrown around by these different desires that I have that I'm not aware of. Actually seeing those clearly, having the discipline, that is what then allows me to be free. As a last question, Don, before we wrap up, I was wondering whether you can think of a role model in the environmental movement.
Thanks. That's a very interesting question. I'd like to just also point out, listening to the previous discussions, that despair is a luxury we cannot afford. And I have been in the environmental movement since 1971. And for me, this is a journey of life. Sustainable issues for me is a life commitment. So at the same time, I take my focus from the teachings and the life of the Buddha. Because to me, the Buddha walked the talk. He didn't simply just talk, he walked the talk. But I am a little concerned about this question on role models, because I think it is important, of course, to learn from others, to learn from leaders who have brought about paradigm shifts in the world, and that is very important. But I would advise you that perhaps the best role model for you is yourself. In other words, to be the biggest single fan of yourself, because it is important to focus inwards, the environment in the environment, and to know what makes it tick, because that is what, in terms of enhancing our talents and skills, would then bring those talents and skills to the services of humanity. And as you have said that this is the last question, I would like to thank Iyad and the UNEP staff for enabling us to participate in this discussion, and also to point out that this is really a pilgrimage for life. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Abou-Moughli and UNEP, for allowing us young people this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you both to Finn and to Don. I think just sort of picking up on what you've said there about, you know, the interesting paradox coming from both young and old. And as Don said, that despair is a luxury we can't afford. I think that's something that we all, both young and old, can agree with. And so using that connector of faith and continuing this dialogue with young and old is really important. And I also like the idea that Don said about, you know, being your own role model, because that brings your skills to the surface and enables you to act on them and, you know, take more part in climate action. So thank you for that. Next, we've got Davina Chauhan, the youth coordinator for Hindu Climate Action, and Jasmeet Kaur, who's studying at the University of Birmingham and is a youth ambassador for EcoSeek. They'll both be speaking to us about greening up places of worship and the challenges that come with this, whether that be religious or cultural, and the solutions that we can bring forward to deal with this.
Davina and I will be discussing greening up places of worship. I will be focusing on the Sikh community and specifically EcoSeek on what they have achieved in creating greener Gurdwaras. They are a Sikh organisation who have responded to the threats of climate change, and their mission is to be the protectors of Mother Earth. For instance, in February 2022 currently, EcoSeek Ireland have partnered up with the Rainforest Nation to plant 1,150 trees to combat climate change, global warming and biodiversity loss. This is done in the honour of Guru Nanak.
Sorry, I was on mute. Fantastic. Thank you, Jasmeet. I'm just going to briefly talk about the work that we're doing at Hindu Climate Action and just more overall what's been happening within the Hindu community and the work that we've been doing. The main aim is to raise awareness about climate change, and really to understand the devastating impacts. We want to work with our whole Samaj and each and every Sampradaya to use our power as a Hindu community here in the UK and to ensure that we have as much impact as possible. According to a 2018 census, there was just under 1 million people who identify as Hindu within the UK. So I think actually kind of adding to what Ed said previously, this is a very large community that we really feel like we can tap into to really make some sustainable changes. We strongly believe in kind of starting conversations within our community about climate change. And we believe a lot of this stems from within our Manders or our temples. So just some of the work that we've been doing at the moment is actually having workshops within our temples, and really this has been more present after COVID restrictions. So our in-person visitations have been really successful. We've had multiple workshops, especially within the Midlands region and within the Gujarati community. So these workshops really outline the urgency of the climate crisis. They outline the responsibility of protecting the planet And they also teach attendees how they can kind of reduce their carbon footprint, but tailored to their current needs and their current lifestyle. We also used these workshops as a recruitment process to recruit people for our sari bag campaign. So what we did was, the aim was to really combat plastic pollution within our local shops. I think what we found was people were buying a lot of fresh vegetables and fresh produce, but then they were using a lot of plastic bags, and we found that a lot of individuals had leftover saris that were stored away in their houses. So what we did is we did like a big project where we asked ladies within the community who had a little bit of experience kind of sewing to produce these, change these saris into reusable bags that they can then use for actually going to shops with, which was really great. And what we found is that once the community started speaking about these environmental issues, it then started stemming to change within our mandirs and within our temples. So what we've now seen is that a lot of temples are now looking at tree planting as a new way of getting a lot of people into the mandirs. And also they are now, with the help of Hindu Climate Action, we now have like an online forum page where all the leaders of the quite big mandirs within the UK have a forum where they can now discuss sustainability ideas. So we've tried to make a lot of impact over time, but I think as me and Jasmine are going to talk about now, we have found that there have been challenges within this area of the community. And I'll pass it back over to Jasmine quickly, just to kind of speak about what these challenges are.
So following on from Davina, key challenges that we've seen facing places of worship, such as the Gurdwara, are the lack of environment, sustainability education, and the power dynamics within religious institutions, and much more. The lack of education on how to aid the planet is limited, yet vital in bringing about change. Gurdwaras are unsure on how to move forward, what action to take, and who to get support from. And the power dynamics within religious institutions hold back the youth really going for the climate change.
Yeah, definitely. And I think to add on to that point of the power dynamics within places of worship, what we found within the Hindu community, and I believe as well, Jasmine, you mentioned in the Sikh community, is that because of the way that power is dispersed, it is up to a couple of decision makers within the mandirs or the gurdwaras or the mosques who need to make these like very tough decisions about where they want to spend their money. And what we found is, due to COVID, there's been a big reduction in the amount of people visiting places of worship, and therefore attendees and donors. So when we've then kind of spoken to our leaders within mandirs from the Hindu perspective, their main aim is trying to get people to come into the mandirs, as opposed to maybe hold this entirely environmental type attitude. Another really interesting challenge that we found within the very big mandirs, especially in London, is that they were very keen to have non-plastic plates, and they wanted like metal plates, steel plates when they serve their food. But what they found is that they didn't have the infrastructure in place for who was going to wash up these plates. And I think it's little things like this that really hold back places of worship, because the infrastructure just isn't there. And they really need to help facilitate this. However, when we now look at the solutions to this, I definitely think that because of how important climate change is, and because of how empowered the youth especially feel, and more importantly, how important the mandir value the youth, I definitely have started to see a lot of change within the community. So now we're going to just quickly talk about kind of the solutions. And the first one is attracting youth groups. So we've seen a lot of mandirs who are really trying to attract the younger generations into places of worship. And therefore, they have had to start considering being more environmental, because they're really trying to attract a new demographic. A really great Mandir group in the UK is ISKCON, part of the Hindu group, and they actually have launched environmental standards. So there's 3 tiers, and they are accredited towards like net zero sustainability. And they, in a sense, go into Mandirs and give them an accreditation based on how sustainable they are within food, energy, water, waste management, and education. So there are definitely really promising solutions that have been happening within the last couple years, which is really great to see. Another really fantastic solution that we saw and have been seeing within certain mandirs is that they have been charging people £1 for any food wastage that they have. And the great thing with this, when we've spoken to people, is that it just starts a conversation. It's not so much about paying the additional money. It's more about, why do we need to pay the additional money? What's the value of it for? And it just gives people that kind of consciousness of being responsible for their actions. And I don't know, Jasmine, if you felt similar within the Sikh community about kind of what's been happening there with the solutions.
Yep, so following on from Davina, education is really important, and especially for the youth. So within Gurdwaras, Sikhi camps have been held to discuss climate change threats and what we as the next generation can do to combat this. Workshops have been held and lots of activities. So for example, the youth have been taking part in beach cleanups, or they've even learnt how to implement daily sustainable actions to keep the earth clean, and just taking care of little bits that have build up to the bigger picture. Also, there's the World Sikh Environment Day, which annually falls on the 14th of March, which is dedicated to the 7th Guru, Guru Har Rai Sahib Ji's work of his environmental revision. So days like this, environmental activities allows for the communities to come together, bring about awareness on climate change and the threat, and allow for these activities to help the environment and for the community to learn more about it. So for example, previously there have been tree plants, there have been marathon rallies, bicycle rallies, there have been organic langar setups as well, and vehicle-free days in institutions, and green hola mahalla, and much more.
Fantastic. So I think, just to conclude then, with the work within Mandirs and within all places of religion, is that from our specific religions, there's definitely been like an increase in interest, and that's mainly down to, again, as I think a lot of these talks and sessions have been on, the community. I think the Mandirs especially are very inspired by what is happening, especially within the youth areas, and therefore they understand that demographics are changing and they need to adjust to current trends. And therefore, although there are challenges with making places of worship slightly more sustainable due to cost, due to infrastructure, I think the way that the community has held themselves and is passionate about the type of issues that we're facing at the moment is a good enough incentive for all places of worship to really push forward and become a greener place. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening.
Thank you to Davina and to Jasmine. Really, really insightful conversation on places of worship. Just want to go ahead now. So now we've got something special from Imam Habib Khan, who's a young Imam currently studying in Egypt, as well as being Religious Advocate of the Year in 2020. He's going to be reciting some poetry about his love for nature, and then talk to us a little about why nature inspires him as a Muslim.
Hi everyone, thank you for this opportunity. I'm really grateful. I just wanted to maybe start off with my reflections, and then maybe just go into as to why I decided to write this. I think the key issue for me is as to why we are facing a lot of problems with climate change and the environment is in relation to the power dynamics between humans and the earth. So we've forgotten that the true power lies with God, And as we walk on this earth, we act as if we own the earth. And because we have objectified the earth and nature in that way, we don't necessarily give the due respect that the earth requires and needs. And therefore, when we do that, we lose that special connection that we have with God and with our spirituality. And so if we go about doing this, we don't really realize the true realities of what we're doing, the consequences of what we're doing. And I think from a person of faith, especially from a Muslim background, there's great encouragement to look after the earth, because without the earth, we don't realize who we are. A lot of people, have issues in relation to figuring out who they are, their identity issues, and partly is because we have become very materialistic. We're too focused on consumerism, and we sort of created a world in a world that God has already provided us, and we've sort of gone away from the beauties of the world that God has given us. And because of that lack of connection, or the weak connection that we have now, we've kind of let it out on the earth, and that's why we don't really respect the earth like we should, and we carry out as if we are the ones in power, when in reality God is the most powerful, and God is the most forgiving and giving. So in relation to that, I wrote there's a story called The Giving Tree. And usually the Giving Tree, I don't know if you've already heard this, but The Giving Tree is a story where a child, he continues to go to this tree, he plays with this tree, and during his lifetime, he's always continuously going to this tree. And because of the love that the tree has for this boy, the tree helps him in every single phase of his life. Yeah, the story sort of, people kind of give the analogy that the tree is like the mother. The mother keeps on giving, and the boy keeps on coming, and the tree keeps on giving as like a mother. But the thing that stood out for me is that the tree was never once thanked. Never once thanked for everything that the tree had done for the boy. So, and I looked at that, and I looked at this situation that we are in, right? God has given us nature and the environment to live in, to breathe in, and we don't really respect and show the true appreciation that nature requires, because nature is a symbol of God, right? God continuously says in the Quran that these are signs, these are clear signs of his existence. And therefore, if you want to really connect with God, nature is one of those reasons as to why we should, nature is one of those channels that we can use in order to connect with God. But we've kind of forgotten that. And so I wrote this poem called The Giving Tree, Appreciated at Last. So I hope you guys enjoy and understand from my perspective. A man, once lost in the wilderness of the beautiful nature of this earth, came across this particular tree that stood out from the rest. He drew closer and closer the more time he spent taking in what was before him. So he begins to speak to this tree and describe his experience. Seeing you blossom into this tree that continues to bear fruit every time you open yourself to me, not just any fruit, but fruits that contain so many blessings and so tasty that a bite takes me into places where I have never been, making me feel sensations never felt before, nourishes in a way that it fulfills my needs but leaves me wanting more, addicted to the sweetness. And so, with every bite that gets deeper and deeper towards the core, I begin to see the seeds of love that are within the fruits. And then I begin to focus more on the bearer of the fruit, and there I see it in its full glory. There I realize how much light radiates from the tree under the shining sun, and how much it has grown with every droplet of rain. The tree has a few marks, perhaps battered from strong tornadoes that threatened to uproot it and force it to lose itself, or by people who, instead of appreciating the fruits, decided to carve things on it and ruin its beauty. But this tree has survived everything. its marks starting to fade, restoring the tree to its natural beauty, more beautiful than ever. And so when I begin to see for what the tree truly is, I begin to be reminded of God. I marvel at the beauty of God's creation and the strength and power He has given to this tree to withstand and remain grounded in the principles of love, purity, and sincerity. While I'm drawn to this, I am actually drawn to God. So I decide to hug this tree. I feel the radiant energy that comes from it, bringing me comfort and taking away my pain, my worries. I feel sensations that overwhelm me to the extent where I no longer want to let go of this tree. My heart is enriched by the natural goodness and nutrients contained in this tree, with years of looking after itself and being showered by God's mercy. I want to hug this tree and be by its side all the time, because the tree gives me so much positivity and goodness. I have no option but to give something back to the tree, which resembles the epitome of service, always serving others, not just with its fruits, but by its mere presence. Its mere presence gives me oxygen, filling my lungs with the goodness which then circulates my body, energizes my mind, my heart, and even my soul. So, in the presence of this tree, I am deeply humbled, as it helps to open my eyes, my mind, and my heart and soul to the divine that is responsible for the tree's existence. And so, when I remember God, I fall in love with this tree as it helps me continue to fall in love with God, His magnificence. I am left in awe, so I decide to show love to this tree, love that the tree deserves, but my love is limited due to my inability to love to the level the tree needs and deserves. So to make up for it, I do the best I can in taking care of it. I protect this tree from people who do not value life, let alone God. I decide to provide water to help this tree to continue to grow. I decide to clean up the surrounding areas of the tree so the tree can live comfortably. While I valued the tree as I saw the goodness within it, I began to see more clearly how much goodness it contained. With each passing day, my love for this tree became tangled within the branches, having this hold over me. I couldn't explain how or why, but it almost felt like the tree didn't want me to leave. For many years, while God looked after this tree, no human had ever given this love before. And so it gradually gets deeper and deeper until my love for this tree is now deeply rooted alongside the principles which have kept this tree going for so long. I have now become a part of this tree, and there is no greater feeling than what I feel just now. I and the tree have truly become one, representing the oneness of God that created this tree in the first place. Together now, we look to serve others on their path to God. But that is not the end. No, not at all. The legacy of this tree will continue with every seed that has been dispersed from the fruits that it bore. Such is the magnificence of this tree and ultimately God that it continues to keep giving and giving. And when I reflect on how my life was before, I feel so deeply honored that God has allowed me to find this tree. With so many trees in this world, I was certainly divinely guided to find this tree, and for that I can never be grateful enough to God. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mom Habib. I think I speak for everyone when I say that was really inspiring about your love for the nature. I would like to say now as well that in a few weeks' time, our group here is going to be meeting to discuss the strategy for the Faith for Earth Youth Council in the UK and make a plan for our climate action for us all. Now, with the formation of this group comes certain responsibilities, and our next speaker, Amran, a student at the School of African and Oriental Studies, is going to be going through our pledges and commitments as the UK Youth Council.
Sabah. I'm just going to try and share my screen. Okay, I hope you can all see that. I'm going to go through our pledges and commitments as the Faith for Earth Youth Council. So to start off, our mission is to encourage, empower and engage with faith-based organisations as partners at all levels towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and fulfilling the 2030 Agenda. And our vision is a world where everything is in balance. So our pledge of engagement, as a Faithful Earth counsellor, we pledge to preserve and protect our environment by reducing waste, conserving energy, recycling, and implementing greener ways of living in all areas of our lives. To organise our community by weaving together faith teachings, the SDGs, and environmental education relevant to our location. To meet and work collaboratively with local project partners and to ask for support from the growing global network of Faith for Earth counsellors. To earn the trust of our communities by inspiring action that brings social change and transformation regarding issues of environmental importance. To provide encouragement and relevant learning tools to increase the number of engaged people working to reduce global warming and to care for creation. To promote the Faith for Earth initiative in my community. And as a Faith for Earth counsellor, we agree to co-design and perform all related activities whilst engaging in the Faith for Earth principles, which are commitment to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, respect for all spiritual and religious beliefs, adoption of the principles of leave no one behind, transparency in governance structure and decision-making, interfaith collaboration with mutual acceptance and respect, focus on the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs, building bridges between existing knowledge and experience scientifically and spiritually, performing actions that respect individual and communal beliefs, as well as aiming at transforming people's behaviours through their spiritual values. Thank you.
Thank you, Amran, for going through that for us. Now, just quickly, I would like to say that Dr. Iyad Abumogli is no stranger to many of us. I know he's already been mentioned today. Now, he's been very instrumental in bringing together faith communities from around the world and forming the Faith for Earth Alliance. And he's been very, very supportive on youth involvement. And I would like for him to share some of his words of wisdom for us as young people and for everybody else listening in, if he's okay to do that. Okay, I think Dr. Iyad might be having a bit of trouble just connecting, but we will just wrap up. I'd like to give a big thank you to all of the speakers for today. We've heard some amazing plans as well as things that our youth are already planning and doing. Now, the aim of the UK Youth Council is to advocate for the empowerment and meaningful participation of young people within the policy and decisions made by the UN, and giving them an opportunity to have their say. This say is going to be on the strategies set in place for the protection of the environment, which undoubtedly are going to be affecting the youth the most. Now, this meaningful engagement is going to be achieved through advocacy, through participation, through partnerships, and through coordination, which this group will give us the ability to do. And again, I would just like to thank all the speakers and thank everybody for attending and for listening. And I think Dr. Iyad might have been able to join, so if I just let him.
Thank you very much, Saba. Thank you, everybody, to all of you. Heartfelt appreciation for taking this to a higher level. We very much look forward that this group, with amazing contributions that you have made today, with this sense of belonging to a cause, that you own this cause and you taking it to fruition, to taking it to action, and not just showing your frustrations, as has been mentioned. So this is appreciated by me personally, by the entire team, by UNEP, and we look forward that we will hear some good news in the future on really putting it into a mechanism of action or for action, a structure, connecting with youth all across the UK and then, to other countries and at the global level and so on. This is very important. Everybody is putting a lot of emphasis on the role of young people in the future. This is your future. This is where you need to design the way you want to live and take it with your knowledge, with your enthusiasm, and with your commitment to these issues. So thank you very much. I hope we will stay in touch. Please spread the word. It is a forum for everybody that is interested in solving the issues that some of us have failed to solve. So congratulations for making it happen and looking forward to staying in touch. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Iyad.